What is the difference between ancient Celtic and Germanic peoples? That is a question that is more difficult to answer than how it may appear. Both the terms Celtic and Germanic were inventions by ancient Greek and Roman writers to describe peoples who they encountered predominantly in northern Europe, particularly in Gaul and Germania. Some people inhabiting modern Spain and Portugal were also referred to as Celtic, however, whereas the ancestors of the modern Celtic-speaking populations of Britain and Ireland weren't referred to as Celtic by ancient authors at all. Similarly, the Goths of antiquity and the early Middle Ages were identified as Scythians by many Greco-Roman writers, whereas nowadays they are seen as Germanic people. And sometimes tribes were identified as either Celtic or Germanic depending on who wrote about them at what time. So to a certain degree, who was Celtic and who was Germanic seems to depend on the perspective of the ancient source one is referring to. But what about modern scholarship? Nowadays, both Celtic and Germanic peoples are predominantly defined by their use of either Celtic or Germanic languages. Unfortunately, neither the ancient Celts nor the ancient Germanic peoples left behind substantial amounts of writing, so identifying who was Celtic and who was Germanic through language is also problematic and often confined to identifying personal or tribal names. Because of this issue, it has also been attempted to tell ancient Germanic from ancient Celtic peoples through archaeology, but recent scholarship has found that formerly relatively clearly defined borders in material cultures were in fact marked by sometimes fairly large transitional areas. So what can we conclude from this investigation? The most likely scenario is that there were in fact people who spoke Germanic languages and people who spoke Celtic languages, and that in some areas they spoke Germanic exclusively, and in others they spoke Celtic exclusively. But in a relatively large area where these cultures met, both languages were probably spoken, sometimes even in the same communities, and intermarriage was common. Celtic may have been dominant early on, before Germanic apparently became more common around and especially after the birth of Christ. This explains why some people recorded in antiquity would have been referred to as Celtic first and later as Germanic. But seeing as both the terms Celtic and Germanic were inventions of ancient writers to categorize people, it may be moot to try and fit people in these categories in the first place. What are your thoughts on this issue? Let me know in the comments below.